We want to welcome everyone to the first ever Seattle-King County NAACP Virtual Candidate Forum. My name is Nick Brown. I'm a partner at Pacifica Law Group here in Seattle, and I will be your moderator for the evening. Tonight's forum is with 3 of the 4 candidates running for District 30 State Representative, positions 1 and 2. For position 1, we have Jamila Taylor. For position 2, we have Representative Jesse Johnson and Mr. Jack Walsh. Tonight's event is a forum and not a debate. Each candidate can answer questions, but will not have an opportunity to respond directly to their opponent. We have some questions prepared around the generic topic of civil rights, and we will also accept questions from the audience. For those of you who are participating, you can type questions into the Q&A section in the chat, and please enter the questions that can be directed to all the candidates. As we discussed, we will have time limits on responses. Unless otherwise instructed, the candidates will have 2 minutes for a response and then a 1-minute follow-up where appropriate that I will direct to the candidates. And both candidates will have the opportunity to respond. There will be a timekeeper for this event. It will flash up a yellow sign when you have 30 seconds remaining and a red sign when your time is up. Please be mindful and try to follow these time limitations. We want to have a productive forum and give everybody an opportunity to learn more about each of you. When the red sign appears, you may finish your sentence, but please stop then. We're going to start by having each candidate take 3 minutes to introduce themselves and provide some opening remarks. And we will start for this session with Jamila Taylor. Jamila?
Thank you, Nick. Again, my name is Jamila Taylor. I am an attorney, a small business owner, and longtime community advocate. I've dedicated my career and years of community involvement to serving the diverse populations in the Puget Sound region. As the former statewide advocacy counsel for Northwest Justice Project, I've managed a network of legal aid attorneys assisting domestic violence survivors and other crime victims. And I've worked locally and regionally on youth violence intervention programs and other crime reduction efforts in our area under the Seattle Youth Violence Prevention Initiative at Therapeutic Health Services and Urban Lake. My leadership experience spans more than 20 years and ranges from policy making all the way to the program evaluation. In fact, one of the organizations I've been involved in since its inception is called blackpass.org. It's the largest African-American reference center online available for free. It was founded here in this region. I know how the work gets done for the benefit of community. And as we rebuild our COVID-19 economic recovery, we need progressive champions who know what it's like to manage public funds during difficult times and who can understand the experience of residents facing difficult decisions in their daily lives. And like many in the 30th District, which is in South King County, North Pierce County, I feel the pain of wondering how my business and family will get through COVID-19. And in fact, I had to make a pivot and I took on a full-time position with the Public Defender Association in their Lead Legal Services Project and Racial Disparity Project. But about me personally, I'm also a daughter and a sister, and I'm in that squeeze generation where I'm helping family members before I even was able to start my own family. And I share a household with them, my mother and my twin brother, and they both have chronic illnesses. In fact, they're on dialysis. So navigating the medical healthcare system is a constant in our family. When COVID-19 hit, they didn't get to sequester themselves or quarantine themselves in their home. They had to go out into the community and get their dialysis treatment. When I first moved to the King County area, I experienced the struggle to find and keep affordable housing. I moved 7 times in 6 years before landing here in Federal Way with my family. I'm running because we need experienced leaders who are committed to addressing our shared concerns about the COVID-19 economic recovery, homelessness, affordable housing, public safety, criminal justice reform, public transportation, healthcare, and equity through all of that. And we need leaders who are committed to giving residents whose future are interrupted by the pandemic hope and opportunity. And together, we can make that happen. I'm proud of the experience and perspective that reflects my deep commitment to public service and positive change that works for the whole community. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamila. We're going to turn to Mr. Walsh. You have 3 minutes as well.
All right. First, I would like to thank Nick and the NAACP for the opportunity to be here, and as well as Jesse and Jamila. Um, I've lived in Federal Way for 35 years. Established a family here. All 5 of my children went through the Federal Way Public Schools. They graduated from Decatur High School. My wife has been here even longer. She actually graduated from Decatur High School. 9 years ago, I established a business here, and I'm very involved with the community. I've been involved with many campaigns over the years. I've been involved with many volunteer efforts for more than 16 years now. I've led the volunteer effort with the annual Federal Way Parks Appreciation Day. I serve on the Federal Way Human Services Commission. Until recently, I helped lead a young single adult congregation with our church. And my heart has been in the community. With my business over the last 9 years, we have hired more than 100 teenagers, high school students, and for most of them, it was their first job. And one of my goals with my business has been to help young people get into the workforce, get started, learn those skills necessary, the teamwork, the time management skills, the work ethic, things like that, helping them to get on their feet to continue on. I've had the young people of all backgrounds, all ethnicities and races, and I've seen these young people grow and mature. Just today, 2 of them came by my shop to visit home from college. One of them is in November will be receiving his bachelor's degree in business management, and it makes me feel good when I see these young people return and with appreciation for the opportunity that they had through my business. I'm very concerned about the things in the district and in the state. One of the things that motivated me to run for office was the homelessness crisis, and which in many ways is not so much a crisis of homelessness as it's an addiction and mental health crisis. And those things need to be addressed. Housing affordability is also a challenge as well, but I want to see these things addressed constructively in a way that helps those who are on the street and helps them to be lifted out of the challenges that they face, and giving them the responsibility to make good choices. But I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to run for office. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. Representative Johnson.
Thank you so much, Nick. And I want to salute the visionary leadership of NAACP in hosting this forum, and also acknowledge we're on Indigenous land wherever we may sit. My name is Jesse Johnson. I proudly represent the 30th District as current state representative. I grew up here in the district in Federal Way since I was 5 years old. My mom had actually just gotten out of the military and got a job at Joint Lewis McCord, and my dad was a small business owner in the general contracting industry and moved his business down here to South King County. And the community opened its arms to us. I really enjoyed my childhood in Federal Way. I'm the oldest of 4 kids. We all navigated through the school system here, went to Federal Way High School, go Eagles, and had an opportunity to play sports and really serve the community as a young person. I actually remember going to serve at Northwest Church, Foursquare Church in Federal Way as a young person, and help with the youth ministry there when I was in high school, and just had that experience of service to community that stuck with me. I ended up going to the University of Washington and got my bachelor's in political science and master's in education. And I've always lived my life by my calling, and I felt called to go into education and serve young people. I worked as a high school, college, and career counselor for 5 years, navigating the system to help young people get into pursuing high school education, post-secondary education, the trades, the military, and finding pathways into high demand jobs. And that's something that stuck with me, is seeing how the system can create barriers for young people rather than provide pathways. And so from that, I decided to run for city council a couple of years back. Felt called to do that because I saw a lack of representation in our current local government, and wanted to see more people of color, more young people. We had never had a council member under the age of 30. And I was proud to win that term and to be the youngest city council member in our city's history, and do a lot of great work in partnership with community. We were able to get funding for youth violence prevention to help support young people in their academic and entrepreneurial plans, and help divert them from going into the juvenile justice system. And we were actually able to open up a Think Lab and a space for young people to do that work here in Federal Way. Was proud to start our first ever Senior Advisory Commission to give voices to seniors around healthcare and housing, and make sure that they had an opportunity to be heard as well. And then from there, I was actually had the opportunity to be appointed to the state legislature about 9 months ago. And since that time, obviously, been working hard to make sure that we have a healthy, vibrant community, focus on the economy, healthcare, pathways for young people into the trades and apprenticeships, and into this new economy that we have, where we really need people to fill these roles in healthcare and skilled trades and IT and engineering and the STEM fields. And so I'm really excited about the work that we've done there this year. And then excited for this new time that we have now, where we have an opportunity to make not only our society better from a global health standpoint, an economic standpoint, but also from a standpoint of systemic racism, and make sure that we address the challenges that we've seen in our country for a very long time. So I'm excited to do that work with my colleagues this year, and to be in this position.
Thank you, Representative Johnson. We're going to turn to the first question, and this will be posed to everybody. And it's a broad question, but I want you to try to be as specific as possible. There are obviously a myriad of issues facing this country, this state, and your district in particular. What do you view as the top priority facing the residents of the 30th district? And I will start with Ms. Taylor.
I would say the COVID-19 economic recovery is the single most challenging issue that's facing all the residents. And the question is, how is it impacting your life? If you think about being in the same storm, but different boats. Some of us are on the cruise ship, and some of us are on a tugboat and helping the cruise ship steer back into the port. Some of us are on the plank of a if you saw the end of the movie Titanic, you're on the plank and you're trying not to get pushed off the edge, and you want to survive. And so we have to think of ways that can support, Main Street businesses, the small businesses in their recovery. We need to help families with childcare resources, because we already had a childcare gap, services gap in the 30th district prior to. There are a lot of folks who don't understand that, an eviction moratorium is not the same thing as rental assistance. We need to make sure that we are preventing homelessness, and thereby avoiding exacerbating the public health crisis that we're in. And then we must continue to focus on equity throughout all those resources that are coming to support the community, because we don't want to amplify the racist systems that have gotten so much inequity and disproportionality, and how people were impacted by COVID-19. So, certainly we must, focus on things that help, get money in the pocket of people so they can circulate their dollars back into community.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Same question for you, Representative Johnson. What do you view as a top priority facing the voters in the 30th district? You have 2 minutes.
Well, for one, I think we definitely need to balance our budget, because when you have a balanced budget, you could do a lot more for the community in terms of social services like public health, education, the economy, unemployment. And so I really believe, unless you're a millionaire or billionaire that's making record profits right now, you're probably struggling financially in some way. And so we can make sure that we have a structure in our state that is more proportionate for working families, seniors, and making sure that they're not paying an overly burdened tax as compared to corporations. Once we do that, we can do a lot. I really believe getting our economy jump-started. This is our moment to make sure we have work retraining in the healthcare field. And similarly to when 9/11 happened, a lot of young people went into the military. A lot of young people want to go into healthcare right now, and we have opportunities to create pathways into behavioral health and mental health services. I was just on a call with the University of Washington about that yesterday, and seeing how we can make sure that we have jobs that are good paying jobs and careers that young people can go into in their own backyard and come back and serve in their community at community health centers. We can make sure that we also have a healthcare system that works for everyone. Access to prescription drugs, we did that this year. I was excited to co-sponsor a bill to make sure that that was cheaper for seniors. And we can also make sure our education system works for everyone. Right now, obviously, we have a digital divide. We need to make sure our districts are one-to-one districts where every student has a laptop and has technological assistance at their home. We need to make sure we have pathways directly from high school into jobs that are high paying. And so I really think we have an opportunity in those spaces, but it starts with balancing our budget. It also starts with making sure that our communities are safe and people can freely live without fear of things that are going to harm their family and their life. And so I think we have the opportunity this year. I'm excited to get to work on it.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, same question. What do you view as the top priority for the residents of the 30th District?
I think the top priority is no doubt the economy. The COVID crisis has put huge challenges on the economy. As a small business person, I've seen it personally. Fortunately, my business has survived thanks to the money that was designated by Congress and the president. If it hadn't have been for that, we would have been out of business several months ago. We are going to make it through it with considerable debt, but we will make it through it. A lot of other businesses haven't made it through it, and people have lost their jobs because of that. There's just a huge number of people who have lost their jobs. We need to get the economy back going so that those jobs are regained. Along with this, one of the challenges that people have with returning to work is that their children are doing virtual schooling from home. And with some of those, that's absolutely necessary. But I think that we need to work hard on safely reopening schools. That's something that needs to be a priority. I think that there are certain people who, if there's high-risk students or high-risk educators, they shouldn't be returning to the classroom, or students who are living with elderly grandparents or impaired family members, they shouldn't be returning to the classroom. But other than that, we should be working on helping people safely return so that the students can get the education they need, the parents are able to return to work and not have the concern with providing education there at home, and getting things back in order so that the economy can go on, people can work once again, and support the families in the manner that they should be doing.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, I want to follow up with some of the economic issues that each of you highlighted. And I apologize if my dog is barking in the background. Welcome to Zoom Life. There was an article in the Seattle Times just last week that highlighted that the city of Seattle itself now has a median income over $100,000. And certainly we've seen overall economic growth in the greater King County area. That article also highlighted, however, that the economic disparity between people of color and white residents in Seattle in particular and in King County at large is vast. And that the average white family in Seattle has an average income of $112,000, while the average Black family has an average income of $43,000. How specifically do you think the legislature can work to address these economic disparities, and what specific programs would you support to alleviate those gaps? Mr. Walsh.
That's for me to begin with? Okay. Really, I think that we need to work on improving the economy, improving educational opportunities for everyone. I know families of all races and ethnicities that fall into both of those areas. I have neighbors right here in my neighborhood who fall into both of those areas, regardless of color. I personally don't think it's so much a matter of race as what it is, maybe more of educational opportunities and being able to take advantage of the opportunities that we have out there. We need to make sure that educational opportunities are available to everyone. We need to make sure that our schools are educating. And with that, not just schools preparing people for college, but also schools preparing people for the trades. With the trades, there's can be a shortage of people in the trades, and today in the trades, they have potential to make very, very good money. I myself have a bachelor's degree, and I have friends who are in the trades that are definitely making much more money than what I am. And so there are opportunities for all people with all proclivities, whether you want to go to college and pursue something on a professional level, such as what Jamila has done, or whether you want to pursue things as an electrician, as one of my other friends has done. There's those opportunities, and we need to help people take advantage of those opportunities and pursue what they want to do.
Representative Johnson, I'll turn to you. It's the same question. You've each talked about the need for economic growth and solutions here. What do you think the legislature can do, and what would you support to eliminate the gap between wealth and income between white communities in your districts and communities of color?
Well, for one, it'd be nice if Seattle could stop gentrifying families out. I heard a stat the other day that the last Black family at the current rate we're going will be in Seattle in the year 2035. So it's only 15 years away. So they have some work to do up there. But I think in terms of our own community, as a people, we've always had to go back and legislate our rights. When you go back to civil rights, the Black codes, Jim Crow, and I think it's another watershed moment in our country's history where we need to go back and make sure that there's opportunities to close opportunity gaps, increase economic mobility, and break cycles of intergenerational poverty. And by doing that, one of the things that I'm really excited about this year is making sure that we fully fund our state equity office. We were able to pass that last year and unanimously across the board, bipartisan support to form our first ever state equity office. And we can do things like creating direct pathways into careers through that equity office, making sure that there's scholarship opportunities for young people that are actually molded both with private and public dollars. And so I think that we can do that. I also think that it's an opportunity to reverse I-200. I mean, that was a thing that really halted a lot of progress our state was making in terms of higher education, economic opportunities for people of color. And so we can do that as well. But I think that, it starts with how do we have the mindset that we actually want to do it? And it begs the question, does our society and specifically our policymakers have the political will and the actual desire to want to make things better and decrease some of the existing disparities that are plaguing our society in the 30th and around the country? But we're the 5th most diverse district in the state. And so we have a lot of work to do to help our own.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, I want to ask you a related question, although a slightly different focus. As you know, particularly during the COVID times, there's been a real call from certain portions of our society to cut back on state spending, to defund certain programs, specifically to deal with the budget shortfalls the state is facing currently. What is your general response to the push to fund some of the state programs now, to cut back on spending to deal with the COVID budget shortfalls?
I think we have to make sure that we're not going in a direction of an austerity budget where you're just slashing everything that some people believe are not essential or not critical to the needs of community. So if anything, we need to headlong into the challenge and making sure that working families, individuals, folks have the resources that they need to be resilient. And so that means we have to make investments in our mental health system. We have to make investments to prevent homelessness and provide rental assistance. We have to make investments in providing childcare resources for more families so that they can return to work. I mean, I've heard from employers who've been frustrated that their staff are choosing not to return to work because they have to help the kids work from home and school from home. And if as many of the folks understand that the challenges they're going through, how do we ensure that we have an economic base that is able to contribute immediately into our tax-based system? And so if we're cutting, then that means that we have more people who have to be reliant on the system. So really, we have to make some investments in the base, the economic base of our community, because right now our tax system is upside down. It is regressive. But at the moment, we really do need to make those investments so that folks have disposable income so they can go out and enjoy their life, the disposable income so they can make those investments like buying their first home, disposable income so that they can, choose a new career path if they want to go back to college or do other things with their life. And this is how we're going to make the economy turn around much quicker. And even with the budget challenges, we just have to prioritizing not making people worse off. And so there's going to be some difficult decisions, but we really need to focus on who needs it most.
Thank you. I want to turn the conversation a little bit. Certainly on the national level, there's been a real conversation around voting and how people have fair and equal access to the ballot to express whatever political choices that they have. So I have sort of a two-part question, and I'll start with you, Representative Johnson. One is, first, do you believe there is a difference in terms of access to the ballot for communities of color? And two, how do we address those disparities if they exist? You have 2 minutes.
Well, I think first and foremost, I mean, at a national level, there's absolutely a problem with voter suppression. We just saw what happened in Texas today with the absentee ballot system and having one poll in an entire 150-mile radius. I think that's pretty egregious. I think on a statewide level, we've done a pretty good job with the last few years, especially with the mail-in system. I think we've alleviated some of those issues, not having to have postage. So I actually got to give kudos to the Secretary of State on that. But I do think there's always room for improvement. I was happy this year in the city of Federal Way. Right before I actually left the council, we got another polling station right by the library. We only had one prior to that. We need to increase places where people can actually drop their ballots in the ballot box. I also think what we have to do around the census, making sure that people do that, because that always brings in more funding, more resources from a federal level, and encourage people that, voting is just the first step in your political activism process. After that, you still have to go on the ground and make sure that it's being enforced, what you're actually voting and trying to legislate. And so we need to make sure that we're partnering with different activist communities and different organizations that are trying to increase voting for everyone, especially in our immigrant population, trying to decrease some of the linguistic barriers with language, having everything in more languages for every district. I mean, we have a really diverse district here in the 30th. Federal Way has over 150 different languages. We can make sure that there's actually increased access through some of the policies that we put in place. And so I think we're doing a pretty good job for our state here in Washington, but there's always room for improvement.
Mr. Walsh, same question again, do you believe there is a disparity in terms of access to the ballot or access to people expressing their political choices between communities of color? And if there is, how would you work to address that?
Yeah, as Jesse said, I think our Secretary of State has done a very good job with the election system. It is a entirely mail-in system here in the state of Washington, and so there's no question about where lack of polling places or anything like that. And so I don't think that here in the state of Washington, I don't think we have a challenge with it. I think that it's been taken care of very well. I think that with strictly mail-in ballot, I think that it does open up things for some possibility of fraud at times. But as far as access to voting, I think that we are a standout in the nation. That there's not a problem with that here in the state of Washington.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, same question. Do you believe there's a disparity in terms of people's access to the ballot in Washington? And if so, how do we work to improve that?
I mean, I think if there's one significant gap that we could probably do better to close, and I echo the statements that I've previously stated, is that our unhoused members of the community have had difficulty accessing their ballots, and when folks are moving from location to location, I mean, like when I moved several times in 6 years, I had to be on top of where my ballot was going and where I was voting. And so, you know, especially at a time when, you know, I had chaos going on in my life. And so I'm a different type of voter. I'm an engaged voter. I want to know where my ballot is. It's a value that it was instilled in me from my family. I think the first time my family went to vote, as a whole, when we were all 18, we all went together, and so it was a ritual for us. But not everyone has that lifestyle in their homes. And my hope is that our community and our electorate, or you know, the Secretary of State, will spend more energy helping people feel a culture around voting and participating, and having a better perception of access. But we have to do something to close the gap for those who are unhoused, those who are moving more frequently than they want. I know that we're reducing the digital divide so that people can check for the status of their ballot and stuff. But I think we need to do a little bit more education and support for those who are definitely unhoused and not in one single place at a time.
Thank you. I want to ask each of you a specific follow-up. So I'll just alleviate 1 minute for this follow-up. And it's a question that is both a voting rights issue and a criminal justice issue, at least in the mind of many people. There's been a national push to expand access to those who have the ability to vote from people who have been disenfranchised because of a felony conviction, as well as allowing people who are incarcerated access to the ballot. So my very specific question to you, and I'm going to start with Representative Johnson, is do you support allowing people who are incarcerated in Washington State, allowing them to access the ballot? If so, why? And if not, why not?
I do. I think that it's important that everyone has a chance to have their voice heard. I would say this, I think, you know, for our state, we do have a rule that if you've been convicted of a felony, obviously it's a lot more challenging unless you go through the court process. But there's so many people that are convicted for low-level crimes. I mean, here in King and Pierce County, we have a lot of people still locked up for marijuana possession after it was legalized in 2012. For been locked up for 20 plus years and haven't had the opportunity to vote. And so I think we need to make it better. And there's also, you know, issues with people that have, on the other side, had DUIs that can vote. And so I just don't think it makes sense. I think we need to make sure we're consistent and making sure that we have a process that enables everyone to have their voice heard. So I would support that.
Mr. Walsh, same question to you. Would you support allowing people who are currently incarcerated in Washington State the ability to vote in our elections?
With that, I would not be in favor of that. There's some prisons in the state that are located in small communities where if those who are incarcerated were able to vote, they would be controlling the election in those towns, which is not just. So for those that are incarcerated to vote, no. For those who have served the time, ex-felons, I think that if they've served the time, if they're off probation, and they paid their paid the price for their errors, then the right to vote should be restored for them. As Jesse said, those who were convicted of things which are no longer crimes at all. I mean, hey, there's things need to be made right with that, and with those people, they absolutely should be able to vote.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Same question: should people who are incarcerated be allowed to vote? And please provide your explanation.
Yeah, I do think that they should be allowed to vote, but vote in the home districts of where they're coming from. Similar in a situation that, you know, if a college student is voting, they're voting absentee ballot from the home state or home jurisdiction that they're from. And in fact, folks who have felony convictions and juveniles in their return to the community, they have the right to vote right now. And so in Washington State, I was part of a group called the Washington Leadership Fellows 2016, and we produced a voter engagement video called diversevotes.org, where we helped educate folks on the fact that they have a right to vote if they're with what we call felony reenfranchisement. So a lot of folks who have convictions don't even realize they have the right to vote, and I think that's as much a challenge is, you know, letting people know that they can engage in the political process in this way.
Thank you. I want to stay with you, Ms. Taylor, on the topic of criminal justice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, nationally, this is one of the driving issues for many voters. In the state, it has historically actually not been much of a priority until more recent years. So sort of a two-part question for you. One, do you believe that our current criminal justice system disproportionately impacts certain communities? If so, what do you think the reason for that disparate impact, and what can the legislature do about it?
Well, I mean, there are folks who build their whole careers addressing this, so I will not be able to get to it in just 2 minutes. But yes, there is a disproportionate number of folks, brown folks and Black folks, who are impacted by the criminal justice system, and there are so many reasons that lead into that. And you know, we can name off a bunch of topics: school to prison pipeline, foster care to prison pipeline, intergenerational trauma, lack of access to economic opportunity. And then just last night, I got to hear from Twyla Carter, who's with the Bail Project, talking about how charging decisions and the bail process is leading folks to plead guilty just so that they can return to their life, because if they're jailed, for example, they might lose their job, they might interrupt their mental health treatment, they might lose access to basic things that are actually stabilizing parts of our community. So there are so many aspects of the criminal justice system that is actually making us less safe and less helpful for community. So I think this is a topic that really needs to be explored, and we need to work on multiple types of legislation that could impact it, not just under the title of criminal justice, but under other opportunities. So, you know, improving our schools, improving access to economic opportunity trainings and education, improving access to mental health resources, and of course, looking at equity throughout all of our systems to address the disparities. I mean, I could go on all night long, but you have other folks here about this particular topic, and it's just a scratch of the surface.
And I'm going to have some follow-up on this topic, but I want to turn Mr. Walsh to the same question. You know, do you believe that there is a disparity in our criminal justice system between communities of color and white communities? If so, what do you think is the cause of that, and what do we do about it? You have 2 minutes. And you're muted, Mr. Walsh.
My apologies there. So one thing I think is important to realize is that that we need to be taking a look at the crime and the individual who's committed the crime, not their law enforcement and the judicial system should be colorblind, and there's no place for color to enter into it. I believe that in the past there's been some laws that were poorly written. I know that in the past in some places there were laws that if you know, that the penalties for crack cocaine versus powdered cocaine were different, and it disproportionately and the punishment was disproportionate. Things like that should not exist. But as far as the prosecuting on the laws themselves, justice should be colorblind, and so that's what I feel strongly about that. I think that we need to be working on more programs to help people, especially with the challenges with drugs. There is many people who are in prison for drug violations. And I think that we need to do a better job in prisons of helping people to make changes in their life, to truly reform and be able to return to society as productive members of society. And there is a need for that. I think that we need to work on community policing and working on helping people to make a change in their lives to begin with. The community court system. Right here in Federal Way, Judge Dave Larson is setting an example of what can be done with community courts to help divert people from jails into making changes in their lives. And that's something that can be addressed as well.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, same question for you. Do you believe there is a disparity in terms of our criminal justice system? What do you believe the cause for that is, and what can the legislature do about it?
So I don't really want to go into the police just yet. That might be another question down the line. But in terms of criminal justice reform, I think there is a lot of implicit bias in our system that needs to get rooted out. And I'll just give a quick example. I actually mentor a young man that attends Central Washington University. And this past year was his first year on campus before COVID hit in Ellensburg. And he unfortunately made a bad mistake and had a possession of marijuana right there on campus. And, he at first thing he did was call me up, and I said, well, have you got a chance to get in contact with a court appointed attorney or public defender? That had not been offered to him. And I know in other cases for other students that are not of color, that's absolutely offered first thing as a priority. And then secondly, because it doesn't have much family support, they were basically saying that he was going to have to serve up to 2 years either in a juvenile system or using EHM, electronic home monitoring. And after talking with some lawyer friends that I know, getting him connected, they were able to get it down to 6 months probation, where he can't be caught with anything like that, and he has to do some community service. And just that one little step of getting connected, which wasn't offered to him, and I know would have been offered to him if he was not a Black male, just shows you the faults in our system. We have a lot of work to do in terms of reform. I think that it shows in our numbers. In the United States, 25% of our prison population is Black people, 60% people of color, and we hold a quarter of the world's prison population right here in the United States. So mass incarceration is real, and it's something that we need to look at. It doesn't mean letting people go for Class A felonies, but it means that we need to reform some of the low-level offenses that especially young Black males are getting caught up in the system for that impacts their entire life. And I just don't think it's fair, and I think we have a lot of work to do to root that out and make sure we have a more equitable system.
Thank you. I want to stay on that topic of incarceration and mass incarceration, and I'm going to direct this question to you, Representative Johnson. Nationally, the conversation about reducing mass incarceration often focuses on drug crime and people who are serving sentences for drug crimes. And while it is true that as a driver of prison population in many aspects at the federal level, that is less true when it comes to the Washington state prison system. And approximately 8% of the Washington state prison population is currently incarcerated for a drug crime. So how do we go about reducing the prison population without solely relying on reducing drug crime or drug offenses? Are you willing to address the more violent crimes and more serious crimes in terms of having the legislature reduce potential penalties around those crimes? You have 2 minutes.
I'll start with the fact that in order to, I think, for future generations, make a better system, we need to make sure we're looking at our juvenile justice system right now, which has a lot of work around sentencing reform. I'm proud to be on the Juvenile Justice Partnership and learning more about the problems we have with sentencing for young people. But I think the biggest thing is diversion for young people. How do we make sure that there's an opportunity for diversion so they don't have to, for low-level offenses, serve these ridiculous terms for things that are actually in the grand scheme of things, not that bad. And I think that we need to make sure that we have better diversion programs, reentry programs, so it's not a revolving door system where the young people are going in and coming back out and going back in. So that's kind of for the future. I think in terms of crimes that are worse, and I'm not sure exactly which ones I would define as I mean, if you go up to certain crimes, I would say that we should probably keep it the way it is. I mean, I don't think that if murder or assault or something like that, I think you do the crime, you should probably serve the time for that. But I do think that there's instances with theft and robbery where, you know, I mean, we have to get to the root of the issue, and that's socioeconomic, and we have a lot of work around that. I don't necessarily think that you can just drop the charges, but I do think that there's adult diversion that could work as well, in making sure that we have a system that supports people coming out so they don't go back in. That's the biggest thing. In Federal Way, talking with our chief, 25% of our cases are people that have already committed a crime within our city. So the revolving door is a real serious problem. We have to make sure that there's wraparound services when they come back out so they don't go back in, and empowering them to want a better life. And I think that's something we have a lot of work to do on.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, same question for you. There's been a talk about how we can reduce the problem of mass incarceration in Washington State. But I want to ask more specifically about whether you'd be willing to look at reforming our system or changing our system to reduce penalties for what people would consider more serious crimes.
Yeah, with that, I largely agree with what Jesse said. For more serious crimes, I mean, violent crimes, that there should not be a reduction. I mean, you know, you need to pay the price. For nonviolent crimes, I mean, some of those could be looked at and see whether the penalty is proportional to the crime that was done. I'm you know, with some of those specifics, I'm not familiar enough with them to say whether it would be good to reduce or not, but it should certainly be reviewed. With all of those who enter the prison system, I think that one of the main objectives of the prison system should not just be punishment, but reformation. And as Jesse said, I mean, helping people so that when they are released, they're better prepared to return to society, and then have services after they're released to be able to help them at that point. There is much too much of a revolving door, and we need to address that and help people encourage people to change, and then help them to change if they are willing to make that change.
Thank you. Jamila, I want to turn to a related question, but on a slightly different focus. Obviously, again, both nationally and in the state, there's been a real conversation about what policing should look like in America. You know, in many ways, Washington has taken some different steps than other places, but just at a broad level, what is your idea of policing reform, and what should the legislature focus on in making that idea come to fruition?
Well, I am one of the candidates that signed on for the Elected for Justice that was promoted by King County Council member Burmai Zihale. And in that, it has 5 tenets, and I happen to have it right here. Demilitarize the police first and foremost. I mean, do we need tanks? Do we need these kinds of military gear that actually puts people more at risk for harm? We need to further restrict the use of excessive or deadly force by police. And we also need to increase the accountability and transparency of police union contracts. We need to give subpoena and other investigative powers an independent oversight, and of course, redirect police department funding to community-based alternatives. So for me, as a victims' rights attorney, I just want to make this very clear. I've worked with victims of domestic violence, and most often they are asking for alternatives to engaging with police. They want the abuse to stop. And so one of the most basic ways is, what is the key way to engage the community on resources? So it's really about redirecting resources where the community wants to solve its own problems. So to me, it's really how do we move in that direction and we reduce the risk to police officers, because the officers who are getting hurt most often are responding to domestic violence calls. So we have to look at how things are unfolding and making sure that not only the community is safe, but officers have accountability for their lack of training in many instances and the ability to transfer from one police department to another. And we need to find a way to decertify officers who are, bad actors in one place and then they are bad actors in other places.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, same question for you. There's been a state and national conversation around policing reform. Do you believe policing reform is necessary here in Washington, and what would that look like from your perspective?
There can certainly be some reforms. Police are not perfect. No one is perfect, and there's obviously across the nation there's been some very sad examples of police who were made very, very serious mistakes, either intentionally or unintentionally, and there's no place for a bad cop. I think that the good cops are the ones who dislike the bad cops the most. But there certainly is some place for reform. One of the subjects that's been talked about a lot lately is defunding the police, and I think that that's completely misguided. I think that there needs to be great training with the police, and greater training, really more funding as we have more funds to do it. And so we need to make sure that the police are properly trained, that they have certifications, and if they are bad actors on one force, indeed they should not be allowed to simply switch to another force. And so I'm very much in favor of reforms of that type.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, same question for you. What would policing reform look like in your mind, and what specifically should the legislature address around these issues?
Well, I think first, when George Floyd was murdered and the officer knelt on his neck for 8 minutes and 46 seconds, I think it showed a lot. But one thing it really showed me was the real severe lack of knowing that there was not going to be a consequence for that officer. He knew that there was not going to be a consequence for him. And I know it's still ongoing and there's still going to be, proceedings and all that, but we have to really make sure that we have a tightened up standard around use of deadly force so that officers know there's going to be an accountable consequence for it. And so when you look at the data since 2005, the last 15 years in this country, only 35 officers have been convicted of a crime related to on-duty fatal shooting, and 3 were prosecuted. So this is both in the civil and the criminal prosecutions arena. We need to tighten up our standards and make sure that we have a statewide independent board, independent of the police, to review all cases of use of deadly force. And working within that, we need to make sure ongoing down in Washington State, we have the Criminal Justice Training Commission that looks over admin investigations for complaints from citizens. They need to make sure there's community representatives. Right now, there's 18 members and 3 are community, 15 are law enforcement and lawyers. We need to make sure there's community representation on that. Same at the local level. One of the things on the Federal Way City Council advocated for 2 years was a localized civilian board to work with law enforcement to review complaints by citizens. Every law enforcement agency should have a civilian oversight board, and we need to make sure that ongoing up the ladder, they're all working together around these issues. I would also say banning police tactics that don't work, chokeholds, neck restraints, no-knock warrants. As part of the police leadership team, I'm a co-chair, we're making sure that we're including that in the police tactics bill. And finally, as Jamila said, demilitarization, so that when police show up in public spaces, they're not looked at as warrior cops, but back to guardians of our community. Right now is not a good place for police and communities of color, and we need to make sure we fix that.
I want to ask a follow-up question, actually 2 follow-up questions. So I'm going to allow each candidate just 1 minute to answer these questions. And just very specifically, as part of policing reform, would you support ending qualified immunity for constitutional violations by law enforcement officers? And 2, would you support opening up police union contracts to the public so they can participate and weigh in on the negotiation of those contracts? Ms. Taylor, I'll start with you.
Yes and yes.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh.
With that, I need to study both of those issues more in depth to be able to answer that well. And anyway, I need to learn more about it before I'm ready to commit one way or another with that.
Fair enough. Representative Johnson, again, the question is, would you support ending qualified immunity for law enforcement officers who commit constitutional violations? And would you support opening up the police union contracts for public negotiation?
Yes and yes, absolutely.
Thank you. I want to change more broadly to a different topic and talk about education in Washington State. Obviously, education now and maybe for the at least near future feels very different for parents and guardians across the state operating in this COVID environment. What do you think the legislature can do to make our education system in general better, but two, more specifically during this time, what can the legislature do to support education during COVID? And Mr. Walsh, I will start with you.
As I alluded to earlier, I think that there needs to be a major effort to help students and teachers return to the classroom safely. Just from my own experience, I have a daughter in the next district over, down in Puyallup, who has a kindergartner and a second grader that they are doing virtual school from home. Virtual education may work well. Hey, some universities do a fantastic job with it. High schools can do, a pretty good job with it with many students. A kindergartner and second grader, it doesn't work. It just simply does not work. And so we need to help return students and teachers to school safely. And we need to be taking a look at what measures can be done to do that. Obviously, if there's our teachers or students who are in a high-risk group or whose families are in a high-risk group, they should continue virtual learning. And we need to work on improving virtual learning as well. I think that there's been a lot of learned about it in the past few months for good and bad. But we need to work on getting them back to the classroom safely, being able to observe social distancing, perhaps not having all the students every day, and being able to work on thinking outside the box on things that can be done to improve the education of those students so that they can get back.
Thank you. Representative Johnson, same question to you. How do we deal with educating Washington students during COVID, and what more broadly should the legislature be focused on?
Well, as an educator, I definitely want to empathize with our families right now. I've talked to numerous families in the last month since school started, and some are really considering pulling their kids out and waiting till next year, just taking a year off, doing a little bit of homeschooling here and there, but they just can't handle it. And I want to empathize with that because that is a struggle. But I also realize right now we're in a tough situation. I mean, when you see the numbers the way they are, and they still have not decreased the way we'd like, then I understand why we're in a virtual setting, in a remote learning setting. But I think we need to make sure that right now we're providing the socio-emotional supports for kids and families, whatever that looks like. I know in Federal Way, our district is repurposing jobs. People that were formerly paraeducators or lunch staff or recess staff are being retrained by mental health experts to provide some type of socio-emotional support for kids and families, even if it's just checking in with them virtually, doing a home visit virtually, but basically checking in and making sure that they're okay during this time, they have what they need. And I love that, because that is at the top priority right now, because they're not getting that same socio-emotional environment that they usually would have. Secondly, I would say, what are we doing to make sure that teachers are supported? Because when we have healthy teachers, we have healthy students and families. And so making sure that we're providing that. But I think moving forward, I really hope that we're back in the building by a year from now, by next year. But we have a lot of work to do. And so right now I'm working with the University of Washington on a project to look at air quality in our schools that could potentially filter out COVID-19 particles by replacing our filtration systems in schools. I think it's important that we look at that physical need, and also going back, how are we providing more pathways for high school students into post-secondary ed in jobs that are high demand right now coming out of COVID. So I would just say all the way around, we need to make sure we're rethinking and re-looking at our system and how we can make it better.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, same question for you. How should the legislature be addressing education in our current environment and in moving forward?
First and foremost, we need to make sure that we're not creating unfunded mandates. Not every school district has the same resources available to other districts, and not all the same families have the same resources even within their own neighborhoods. There is a digital divide, and so like if we are not able to get our kids back into school because the health crisis is continuing to escalate, I think you all have they just voted not to reopen their school like within hours. I mean, it is an ever changing challenge. I was just standing on my street and I saw a school bus come by and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, they're back. But then the reality hit is that they're preparing just in case, but there might not be school in person. So we have to make sure that we don't have unfunded mandates for school districts. Let them make local decisions on what they need to do. We also need to make sure that we have more resources for families. When you've got 3 and 4 kids in a household and each one of them is in a different grade, they all have to access the internet. I just lost internet the other day and I was going bonkers not being able to work from home, Zoom for these meetings, having access to the communities. And our kids are suffering because they are not able to connect with each other, their friends, their mentors in person. And so we know that there are community supports that are standing in the gap, that are helping come up with solutions. I mean, I've heard about folks developing pods to support kids, but then there's an equity issue there. So the question is, how do we ensure that there is equity as we are trying to implement resources for the communities, and that no child is lacking for access to all of the very best resources that they have in their school district and throughout the state.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. Stay with you for just a 1-minute follow-up that I'll address to all the candidates. In addition to the educational challenges that people are facing now, certainly the NAACP has been involved in addressing racism or perceived racism within our schools in terms of how education is provided and how discipline in our schools is administered. What do you think that the legislature can do to tackle the problem or perceived problem of racism in our school system? In just 1 minute for this question.
I think this is something could be a #1 focus of the Office of Equity, to work with the educators throughout the state and look at whether or not it's a pandemic. I mean, when I was working in the Youth Violence Prevention Initiative, there's a real phenomenon with constructive expulsion from school, where kids are pushed out of school and then into the community, and then it feeds into the school to prison pipeline. And so racism does play into effect. I mean, we've seen a lot of conflicts where children who are misunderstood with the challenges that they have at home or challenges that they have in the community, they come into the school and teachers are underprepared to deal with it. So there's a lot more that we need to explore in terms of racism and disciplinary practices, and how it has a disastrous effect on communities, and how to ensure that kids truly have access to their educational opportunities.
Mr. Walsh, same question for you. How should the legislature address racism or perceived racism in our school system? In just 1 minute, please.
There's obviously never an excuse for racism. Racism is inexcusable. I think that with discipline in schools, I mean, it needs to be done on a case-by-case basis. Those who are the teachers and administrators need to be sensitive to the needs and the background of each child. No matter what the race, no matter what the ethnicity or the affluency or lack of affluency of the child and the child's family. it needs to be taken a look at on an individual basis and treated accordingly. And once again, there's never an excuse for racism in any form whatsoever.
Representative Johnson.
You know, I think one thing that we can do is partner with groups like the NAACP. I know that NAACP at a national level has a Know Your Rights campaign type work that we can equip and empower our young people to know their rights. So if they are confronted with something around racism, they'll know what to do and say and to point it out and to know it's there. That's something I struggled with growing up. I knew something was wrong, but I couldn't put my finger exactly what's wrong with that situation. And I think our young people should know that. I was proud this year in the legislature to help sponsor a budget proviso to provide every educator in our entire state, including para staff, a day of cultural equity training. And I know that's just a start. One day is not going to solve the problem. Racism is systemic in our schools, but we have to make sure that we at least provide opportunities for awareness. I love what Federway and Highline schools are doing with their equity symposiums, making sure that staff have an ongoing group process, professional learning community process to learn about racism and how it is seen every day and how they continue to make the status quo continue. So I think we need to make sure that that's provided and continuing to provide funding for that.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Representative Johnson, on a topic related to our schools. As you know, Referendum 90 is on the ballot this fall, along with the positions that you're running for. And this addresses the teaching of comprehensive sex education in our public school system. And just so the people watching are clear, a vote to approve Referendum 90 supports allowing the Senate bill that passed earlier this year to take effect, thereby requiring public schools to provide the comprehensive sexual health education for all students. And a vote to reject Referendum 90 opposes that bill to take effect, thereby not requiring schools to teach comprehensive sex education. What is your position, Representative Johnson, on Referendum 90?
I would vote to approve. This is something that I've had to think hard about because I also understand people's concerns that it's government infringing on their lives. What I would say is the bill from last year to this year is completely transformed. They now have the opt-out clause for families. The K-5 curriculum is totally socio-emotional learning, consent, affirmative consent. And I think it's important for kids to understand that. I had a group of young people from our district come up and testify on behalf of the bill in Olympia this year and talk about the fact that they were victims of sexual assault. And if they would have had this education, or at least a portion of it, it could have prevented or helped them deal with that situation. And that really moved me to really understand their perspective. And it's one of the reasons why I voted for that bill. But I think we need to make sure that kids that need this education are getting an opportunity to get it. And parents that don't want their kids to have it can opt out. And I'm glad with that. And every school district in our the 30th has some version of sexual health education already. And this is just enhancing and making sure that all the education is comprehensive K-12.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh, same question for you. What is your position on Referendum 90?
Strongly reject Referendum 90. I think the comprehensive sexual education is misguided. They say that parents can opt their children out. There's really no opt-out. They opt out, but what's going to be the subject in the playground the next day? It's going to be those same things. And also the way that the fact that it's comprehensive sexual education, it goes into throughout the curriculum. I mean, there's not one specific class that's hey, this is a sex ed day. It is a kind of a wraparound curriculum. And so the opt-out option is not right. And also it takes things away from the power of the school district. It's putting it in the hands of bureaucrats in Olympia rather than the local school district. And I think that is wrong. We should be keeping things closer to where the parents can have control, where local school districts can have control, rather than the legislature and bureaucrats in Olympia. I think that it's misguided, and I strongly reject Referendum 90.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, same question.
To my knowledge, that there is no curriculum, no specific curriculum out there, and that local school districts have control over how they are participating within the guidelines. And for me, as a domestic violence and crime victims attorney, it is a public safety issue that I need for our children to know how to say no, how to have body autonomy, and how to protect themselves from folks who will manipulate them and harm them. And so we have a lot of children who are vulnerable to exploitation by people who are in their lives. And if they don't have access to the education to know what is safe for them, what is consent, all that as an age appropriate level, then we are not protecting our children. So for me, it's a public safety issue. I have to deal with it when I'm handling family law cases. I'm handling domestic violence protection orders, and I'm working with others who are working on sexual assault protection orders, and so many of them are involving minors. So I think it's something that we absolutely need to have out there so that the children know that they can be safe and have pathways to being safe. So for me, R90, it is the pathway to supporting our young people by providing this education for them.
Thank you. I want to turn to a topic that was raised in some of the opening comments by the candidates, and that is around housing. In addition to the economic disparities, we've seen housing cost in the King County area, and frankly across the state, really grow rapidly over the past few years, and not at the same pace as general incomes that our residents have. How do we address the housing challenges, crisis, if you will, in your district and in King County at large? And how do we address the issues around homelessness and the unhoused? Mr. Walsh, I'm going to start with you.
This is actually one of the things that led me to want to run for office, is that there is indeed a challenge with affordable housing. The price of housing has continually gone up, which is natural, but it has far exceeded the inflation rate and the wage salary rate. And so the housing has gone up far in excess of that. And one of the biggest reasons that has happened is regulations. I believe strongly that we need to take a good look at regulations on regulation for developers, regulations for builders. Obviously, regulations are necessary. It's important that there are regulations, but they need to be kept in check. And there's a lot of regulations that have outlived their usefulness. For example, the going clear back 30 years ago, there was the Growth Management Act, and the Growth Management Act was created with the best of intentions. However, what it has done, it has limited the supply of land that can be developed for housing. It's concentrated housing in a much tighter area. And so as a result, the demand has exceeded the supply, and it's the law of supply and demand. Short supply, high demand, the price goes up, and the price has gone up tremendously. It strikes home to me. My own daughter and son-in-law, they're currently looking at having to go clear out to Port Orchard to buy a starter home, a small starter home, for in excess of $300,000. I mean, that's, there's challenges with that for a young couple to do that. Also, one thing that we need to be taking a look at is making it so that it's more easy to develop condos rather than apartments, so that more people can grasp that a great American dream of home ownership. That's very important. Auxiliary dwellings, taking a look at different regulations, but anyway, deregulating can do wonders with helping reduce the cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Johnson?
That's a great question. Housing is definitely an important issue in our district. We have so many families and seniors on fixed incomes living paycheck to paycheck, and they've expressed they can't pay for their mortgage or their rent, as well as all the other things, utilities, food, and so on. I really think that first and foremost, we must make sure that we have people that are able to stay in their homes. So preventing unjust evictions. I was happy to work with Washington Community Action Network to have the Stable Homes Initiative in Federal Way that passed, and we're trying to take statewide. So people aren't getting evicted for having 5 people over on a weekend too much and breaking the noise control, or anything like that. Just a lot of different reasons that I was hearing. And I think we need to make sure that we have that put in place across the state. I'd also say making sure that housing is affordable, having new ways for people that are currently renting to have pathway to home ownership. Say if there's a program, if you stay in your home or in your apartment for 3 years and you've paid your rent on time, you've done all the right things, there's a real pathway to home ownership for you, and you're able to get a tax credit to buy a home. I think we need to make sure that we have different types of housing. I mean, single family homes and apartments make up the majority of our district. I think there's like 48% of our community that lives in apartments, but we need more condos, duplexes, triplexes, different places for people to live, also for our seniors as well. So I think, we have a lot of work to do to diversify our housing market in South King County in the 30th, especially in light of the fact that more people are coming into our community and we need more space. And I really think that we can create a space, particularly in downtown Federal Way, where we go up. We have condos and different places for people to live right there. And we have underdeveloped, restaurants and places for people to eat. And we have that right underneath. So we have a lot of work to do to diversify our housing market and make sure that people can live and stay in their homes too.
Thank you. Ms. Taylor, same question. What should the legislature be doing to address the housing challenges and crisis in the state?
Yeah, homelessness I think is separate than affordable housing, but interrelated key critical issues in homelessness, and knows no boundaries. And specifically, since the focus has really been on the affordable housing issue, I think we absolutely must work in collaboration with the stakeholders, multifamily housing developers, tenants' rights organizations, municipalities, because when we're talking about increasing the housing stock, even with the Growth Management Act, the municipalities have to ensure that there's utilities, that there's roads and lands and resources, and what impact does it have on the schools? I mean, I just a few years ago, I think when I first moved to Federal Way, there were a number of multifamily housing options that were coming into the area, and the city council at that time voted to have a moratorium so that there wouldn't be more density. So there's complex issues that are at play to increase housing stock. But we also see with COVID-19 that with folks who are unhoused, that when we want to do something, when there's a political will to do something, suddenly we are able to find ways to get people housed. So for example, folks who are homeless, we were able to find hotel options to house people and keep them stable and reduce the potential expansion of the COVID-19 risk. So I think we can look at ways of converting buildings that maybe could be used in a different way. I've been in communities where instead of a mall that is the footprint of the Commons Mall that's down in Federal Way, they turned it into not only a retail district on the first few levels, but then they had hotel and they had condos. And so it's like folks get to live, work, play, possibly even worship, and get to work because light rail is coming, and that will increase their options for moving economically within the region.
Thank you. I want to ask just one short follow-up for Representative Johnson and Mr. Walsh along the same question around housing, but specifically around homelessness. What do you think are the 1 or 2 things that the legislature is not currently doing to address homelessness that it should be doing? And just a 1-minute question or answer for this question, please. And I'll start, with Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Nick. So I think one thing is we can create a better program for families or youth that are experiencing homelessness. I know in other states there's a host to home program where basically people that are longtime property owners can get a reduction on their mortgage every month, so a tax reduction. Similarly, if you host an international student for college and they have a visa, we can do that for youth experiencing homelessness. We have over 1,500 youth experiencing homelessness just in Federal Way alone. And so I think we can create a program where it's both people benefit. I mean, people can get less taxes every month and host a young person that needs a home or a place to stay with wraparound services. Secondly, I think making sure that shelters are provided for, and there's more public-private partnerships to leverage money for those shelters. I was very happy to get money to finish the capital project at Fusion this year, and we're going to have 75 families housed, I think, by next February in that facility. So I think we need to make sure that we have those partnerships so that we can leverage dollars to build more shelters.
Thank you. And to you, Mr. Walsh, what should the legislature be doing to address homelessness that it's not currently doing?
What Jesse just mentioned about the youth program with homelessness, I mean, hey, I'd be all in favor of learning more about something like that. But the biggest part with that I see with homelessness, and many people see, is that visible homelessness, the people who are living on the streets and encampments and things like that. So many of the programs are basically enabling that type of lifestyle rather than trying to help them change from that lifestyle. I think that there needs to be greater law enforcement on drug laws and things like shoplifting laws. The local stores have a tremendous amount of goods going out of the stores every day, thousands of dollars a day, and much of that ends up in drug money. Things like that, the laws need to be enforced. And then instead of spending money on things that are band-aids on the problem, such as Seattle's crazy idea of safe injection sites and similar type things to that, is actually putting the money on addiction recovery programs and mental health programs. The idea that the Western State Hospital was decertified is tragic. I mean, we need to be working on things that can actually help them. Our current system of enabling is not compassionate to them or to the community.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. All right, we're going to turn now to closing statements, and each candidate will get 2 minutes. I want to thank the candidates prior to those statements just for your thoughtful answers on all these various topics. These are really important issues to your district, but I do want to allow for everyone to have a closing statement. And I'm going to try to go in reverse order from opening statements. So I believe Mr. Johnson, or excuse me, Representative Johnson, you are first. 2 minutes, please.
Well, again, I want to thank NAACP for this time. And I want to thank both Jamila and Jack for their perspectives and joining me. First and foremost, this is an amazing time right now that we're living in. It's a bleak time, but it's an opportunity as well. Considering all of the crises that we're experiencing with the global health pandemic, economic uncertainty that's existing, social unrest around race relations, and really like the spirit of our country and our democracy that's at stake. And we need to elect bold leaders that are ready and prepared to make bold decisions and represent the entire community. And that's definitely what I stand for. I want to make sure that we're closing opportunity gaps, increasing economic mobility, making sure that we have education, housing, healthcare, in a law enforcement system that works for everyone. And I really believe we can do that this year. I've been a servant of the community. I grew up here, and I really want to make sure that I'm working alongside community. This is a partnership. When I run and when I'm a leader in the community, it's a partnership with the community to get things done. And I really take that to heart and make sure that I'm keeping and centering the voices of those that are most marginalized in our community, because that will benefit the entire district. So I'm really excited to get to work. I've led on making sure that we've had supports for at-risk youth, for families, supports around mental health, supports around housing, and obviously in education where I work, making sure that we have pathways into jobs for our young people and for everyday people. And that's what I'm going to continue to do in Olympia, is to fight for a healthy and vibrant community that serves all of our neighbors and make sure that we are represented in a way that benefits everyone. So thank you for the time. Thanks for the viewers that are watching. And again, thank you. God bless.
Thank you. Mr. Walsh.
Yes, I also would like to thank the NAACP for this forum, and Jesse and Jamila. It's great being here with you. I think that it has been an enlightening conversation and a great example of a constructive conversation. I feel very strongly that we need to work on making changes in the state. The direction that the majority party in Olympia has been taking us, I think, is largely the wrong direction. We need to work on deregulation. We need to work on. I have a great fear that because of the challenges with the reduction in revenue because of COVID, that people are going to take it as an opportunity to raise taxes, capital gains taxes, things like that make it so that people have less opportunities here, that will encourage businesses to leave rather than to be established here. Washington State has been the incubator for so many great businesses, and some of those businesses we've just saw in this week that the businesses are looking to go to other areas. That has an impact on our economy here. We need to work on creating a business environment that keeps jobs right here in the state of Washington, so that people can take advantage of it, that they can bless themselves and bless their families and bless the communities through that. Being a business owner, I've signed the front side of the paycheck. I know the challenges that are needed to be able to keep a business going. People need to people become self-reliant rather than reliant upon the government. I strongly believe that families should be where the moral upbringing of the children is. I think that the comprehensive sexual education bill, I think that is misplaced. It has good intentions, but it's misplaced. But I think that we need to make a change in the direction of the state, and I am the bold person that can help do that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsh. And lastly, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you to everyone for your comments tonight and for this forum. It's an honor and a pleasure to be able to share my ideas and my thoughts with you tonight. And what I want to share is that I'm an HBCU grad. I was afforded opportunities that many in our community had not had. And it's an awesome responsibility to provide leadership in this community. And that for me means that I need to engage stakeholders at all levels and making sure that folks who don't traditionally have a seat at the table have a voice in Olympia, have voice with me, have voice in the future that they want to see. I fought for family jobs. I've faced health crises. When the COVID-19 crisis hit, I didn't have health insurance. And so I was immediately concerned about whether or not, if I got the condition, that whether there would be a pre-existing condition that would keep me from having access to healthcare needs in this community. As a member of a family, a multi-generational family, caregiving is a challenge. In that caregiving continuum, how do we ensure that our seniors can age in place, can be safe from harm, safe from exploitation? How can we ensure that families remain intact? And being able to go down to Olympia to have those lived experiences that are actually more common than people realize. I think it's essential as those important decisions and priorities are made down in Olympia. So I'm ready to do the work, and I'm ready to bring the community with me.
Thank you again to all three of our candidates showing up again today to have this conversation. Jamila Taylor for position 1, Representative Johnson, and Mr. Walsh for position 2. Once again, to everyone who's participating, this is being recorded and will be available through the NAACP website and on their YouTube. So thank you again to all three of our candidates, and we will call it an evening. Have a good evening. God bless.